You're welcome, anytime.
Great, thank you.
Do you shut us our micros when he is speaking so that he has... Sì, c'ha ragione pure tu. Scusa, vuoi che spegniamo i microfoni quando parla lui?
Ci
Così...
penso io perché sennò facciamo...
Ok.
Ci penso io, lo passo io.
Ok.
Se lui sente...
Uh-huh.
Guardate che parlate vicino così non devo alzare
Certo.
troppo i vostri.
No, va bene, perfetto. Grazie mille.
Ci spostiamo un po' così si vede
Il fatto è che non...
la dottoressa. Facciamo così. Ok? Io tra poco vi faccio iniziare. Partiamo con questa link e andiamo.
Ok, ansia.
We lost Lorenzo. We're waiting for him to come back.
Hey, yeah? Can you?
Oh, yeah.
Can you hear me?
We're just waiting for them to put you back on the screen.
Okay.
Now you're just a voice in our ears. Oh, excellent. Okay. Lorenzo, can you also see the turnout? It's actually pretty good.
I can see it, yeah.
Oh, so
no.
we have a full room, and everyone's wearing
Okay,
t-shirts with their
great.
name on it. So, so thanks everyone for coming. I think this is going to be a really interesting panel. The topic is certainly fascinating, and I'm going to do my best to let our panelists really speak to their experiences, because it's interesting, maybe even a little scary. The format that we're going to try to do is walk through some of the history of the illegal wiretapping of journalists here in Italy, and talk about how that is a threat to journalism, not just in Italy, but across Europe and the world. So I think the best way would be to have the panelists actually introduce themselves. So we'll start with Nancy, and then Lorenzo, and then Ilaria, please, if you would.
I will briefly introduce myself. I'm a freelance journalist covering Middle East and North Africa. And I don't know if you are familiar with what happened in my case. I've been wiretapped from the Italian government, from the Italian prosecutors, for 6 months while I was covering human trafficking. Basically, the prosecutors wiretapped me, or gave the green light to wiretap me, because they were working, they were investigating on the potential involvement of NGOs in the human trafficking. I don't know how many of you are Italians and how many of you are foreigners, but in Italy at certain point the discourse on the migration and irregular migration got very much polarized and even toxic. So even human defenders like NGOs started to be a target of prosecutors. So I mean,
Can I ask you a quick question just on that?
Sure.
You're saying that their targets. Who were the actual targets, and where, what country primarily? It's mostly out of Libya, yeah?
yeah, I was wiretapped and we are talking about June 2017 till December 2017. I was wiretapped while I was working on the human trafficking, but the fact is that my main expertise is not the NGO's research and rescue mission at sea, as for many colleagues. There is a lot of press on board very often with NGOs, groups. In my case, my work is mainly onshore in Libya. Well, it used to be. I've been based in Libya for 5 years, and I've been extensively working on the human trafficking. And at the last part of my staying and reporting in Libya, I investigated the involvement of the Libyan officers in the human trafficking. Again, I don't know if you are familiar, because at a certain point it became a very big news in Italy and all around Europe. I uncovered the case of Abdullah Rahman al-Milad, known as Bija, and he was back then, and even today, after he was for a while in the prison, but back then he was the commander of a Coast Guard unit west of Tripoli. And I mean, after a few months, well, actually 1 year of investigations, I got to understand that he was on top of this network. So I reported everything, and the timing was very sensitive because, in fact, it was the period that the Italian government, under the Interior Ministry, led back then by Marco Minniti, was they were closing an agreement with those Libyan officers. So I mean, officially, I was wiretapped because of my of some sensitive information that I've got from the NGO's work. But actually, I was with the MSF for a mission only for 2 weeks.
So how did you?
Officially, it was for MSF for my report with MSF offshore. But in fact, and this is of course a speculation because so far there are no proofs and facts. We can just connect the dots together, you know? So it's a speculation. They wanted to know what I had in my hands because I was the only one very well informed about the connections between the Libyan officers and the human smugglers in Libya.
So how did you learn that you were wiretapped?
It was recently, actually. It was very weird the way I mean, I've been always had the sense, you know, the feeling that I was underwatched, of course, throughout I mean, all my reporting in Libya. My mobile has been giving always very crazy and, you know, schizophrenic signals to me. Each time the phone calls would overlap and things like that. But yet, when I know about officially that I was wiretapped, it was last April, less than a year ago. Well, actually 1 year ago, exactly 1 year ago, because a colleague of mine, an Italian colleague of mine, phoned me and he asked me, Nancy, do you know that there are, I mean, there is a bunch of your conversations in the file, that in the folder that the prosecutors just put in the archive, because basically last April, why it was uncovered last April, because the preliminary investigations taken by the prosecutors in Trapani took over 3 years, more or less. After those 3 years, 1 year went past because of due to the official procedure and for translation and things like that. Once the preliminary investigations were taken to the district attorney in Trapani, in that moment, some colleagues had access to the folder. So the colleague that was working on this file got to know that my name was there and I was wiretapped. And the problem is that my private conversations have been widely spread.
Because
all
they were
around.
they were
there.
same folder.
So we are talking about several levels of violation of my rights as journalist, first of all, and even as private citizen, because clearly, I mean, my private conversations with colleagues, even over my problems, private problems, were there just at disposal of anybody. They started also to circulate on social media, and for me it was, I mean, as
it's a form of harassment.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to ask certainly for as we go through, I'm going to ask Ilaria, who will represent sort of some of the legal facts of the case. But before I do that, there's one other question I was going to ask you, Nancy, and then we're going to hear about a similar case that happened to Lorenzo. But you had mentioned to us earlier that in addition to being wiretapped, before you knew you were wiretapped, you were also invited to speak at
to the authorities.
To the authorities, right? Can you explain a little bit about what happened there and what that experience was like?
Yeah.
And this is before you knew, right? So
Okay,
so
we
they
have
knew
to-
that you were wiretapped, but you didn't know, right?
We have to put something in perspective. First of all, while this case was taking place, these facts were taking place, I was already kind of kicked out from Libya because my investigation was published December 2016, and it was the last time that I was in Libya. Afterwards, after my investigation was published, I kept asking for visa, but they never gave me visa. I tried also to be in touch with the person that I thought was the source of the problem. And he proposed me very weird stuff, like, okay, if you come to Libya, and we are talking about Abdul Rahman al-Milad, he told me, okay, you can come to Libya, and I will give you an interview in Meitiga. Meitiga is the international airport where all the militias have their secret cells. So the red light started to to pump very, very strongly.
So it wasn't like pizza or anything.
No,
good?
absolutely.
It was
And he
different.
told me, you can come to Meitiga, and I will give you the interview just to prove you wrong. If you manage to prove me wrong, I will enter the cell. This is what he told me. I will enter the cell with my own legs. If you can't prove me wrong, you will be judged under the Libyan law. Now, the justice in Libya is missing for a while now, so I thought, okay, there is no room for a fair face-to-face meeting, so I couldn't enter. I kept trying, and many things happened. I even asked the Italian authorities to double check, but anyway, I've never been persona non grata, meaning that I've never violated the Libyan law. They kept just not replying. It was a kind of blackmailing. So in these circumstances where I was trying to enter Libya, but I couldn't, so they basically censored me in the simplest way possible, not giving me the access. I started to participate in the NGO's missions, and then I went to Iraq, I did other jobs. And suddenly, I've been called by the Italian police that was working under the prosecutors of Trapani, and they asked me to show up and to tell them about the involvement of the NGOs in the human trafficking. I went there, and actually I told them, listen, honestly, I have no clue about the involvement of the NGOs in the human trafficking, but if you want, I can tell you another story. And I told them all that I knew. And I told them, listen, I'm in danger. My life is in danger. And I knew that I was in danger also because back then I was based in Tunisia, as I was kicked out from Libya. I was based in Tunisia, and I felt very, very unsafe because luckily for the Libyans, Tunisia doesn't require visa for Libyans, okay? So because of the economy of war...
So they could find you there?
Yeah, they could easily come. So once I was very tensed, and I thought that I was in danger. A man from the Algerian intelligence approached me. Actually, they had to go through a friend, that were close. And they managed to approach me because I was very, very, I tried to avoid all these ambient always. And they told me, listen, don't worry, we are watching your back. Because Algeria, and then at that moment we were having a tea with actually a colleague. He's a journalist, Algerian journalist that works, he's an informant. I felt like, okay, I'm not crazy. It was like a kind of relief when I heard that. And so I knew that I was in danger. And then I was heard by the police, and I told them the story. And the policeman was pretty shocked from the story, but then nothing happened. And just after so many years, I knew that while I was talking to the police, they were wiretapping me. I don't know. The big question mark is which kind of software they used, because again, I used to live abroad, so I didn't use back then so much my Italian mobile number. That it's the one that they activated the protocol for the wiretapping. They basically caught on the wiretapping all the conversations that I had on applications like WhatsApp and so on and so forth.
And we can talk, and I'll talk a little bit about that at the end of this thing. I want to pivot over to Lorenzo, who had a similar experience just a few years later. And Lorenzo, who works for The Guardian and covers, or was covering similar topics, had a run-in not unlike this one with the Italian authorities. So Lorenzo, why don't you walk us through a little bit of your story?
Yeah. First of all, thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I want to thank the International Journalism Festival for this opportunity. Yeah, my case is different from Nancy's case, and it all started with the announcement of an arrest. Basically in 2016, prosecutors in Palermo announced the arrest of a man suspected of being one of the world's most wanted people smugglers. His name is Medani Yedego Mered, nicknamed the General. He's Eritrean and was accused of smuggling thousands of asylum seekers from Africa to Europe. This police operation was actually presented to the press as one of the biggest police operations in the world that year. Mered was described as a mafia boss and compared to a sort of general of the smuggling network. However, the man arrested in Sudan, that's where he was arrested, and extradited to Italy, looked very different to photographs of Mered, of the real smuggler, released by prosecutors before the arrest. And close friends and relatives of the man arrested claimed, in fact, that the Eritrean extradite is, in fact, a man named Medani Tesfamariambere, a refugee who was milking cows on a farm in Asmara. So they had to arrest the Al Capone of the desert, and instead, basically, a farmer ended up behind the bars. A farmer who shared only the first name with the real smuggler. So it was clear, after a few hours from the arrest, that the man in jail was a victim of mistaken identity. So at the time, me and Patrick Kingsley, at the time Patrick was working for The Guardian, so we started to investigate and collected evidence and testimonies from witnesses, from relatives of the men arrested, relatives of the real smuggler, pictures, documents, which confirmed that the man facing a trial in Italy was not the smuggler authorities announced to have arrested. Medani Yedego Mered, the real smuggler, was in fact still at large, is still at large, in Uganda probably, while an innocent man for 3 years, had to face a long trial and was arrested in his place. Now, of course, prosecutors, they probably didn't like our work, which attract their attention. And among the many factors that point to the innocence of the man wrongly arrested, including 2 DNA tests and several testimonies, we also found out that the real Mered was living up in Uganda, spending his substantial earnings in nightclubs, basically. And prosecutors never clearly responded to our question. But for 3 years, they insisted that the man in jail was the real smuggler. Now, this is, my personal view, admitting that they had arrested the wrong person, it meant admitting that a giant investigation that spanned 2 continents and 5 countries was a complete failure. It meant admitting that it was not one of the biggest police operations in the world, but definitely the most embarrassing one. So one day, I think it was November 2017, prosecutors produced to the court a massive file containing a series of new wiretaps And well, there was my name in it, and 3 pages of phone conversation between myself and one of my sources. My source was an Eritrean man close to the family of the man arrested. We were talking about the opportunity of interviewing the wife of the real smuggler, and was explained to him how we needed an interpreter for that. Basically, the wiretaps were totally irrelevant from an investigative point of view. Totally irrelevant. But prosecutors had decided to transcribe the conversation, print them, and produce the file to the court, making them public. They identified me as a Guardian correspondent and identified my source too. And I was shocked. I knew journalists could be wiretapped and spied. However, I couldn't help but think that, to me, that was a clear attack to investigative journalism. It was a clear violation of my rights as a professional journalist. I didn't see any reason for them, if not to try to discredit the Guardian's work. And I never thought that journalists, should not be wiretapped if they are suspected of having committed a crime. But unfortunately, more and more often, wiretaps are being used as a tool of intimidation. And I think it's about time to stop this, because what is at stake here is not only my work, it's not Nancy's work, it's not only the work of my colleagues or the lawyers. I think what is at stake here is the information, but also the lives of innocent men, which sometimes journalists can help to change.
Do you think that, and you had mentioned this when we had spoken earlier, you alluded to the fact that there's others who are being wiretapped as well. And so we know, we heard from Nancy's story and we heard from yours, and you learned about it both by either your colleagues or yourself finding your own conversations in these dossiers that the prosecutors release. Do you think that, you see this as an intimidation tactic for journalists across Italy? Is this something that you think is widespread?
No, I have, as Nancy said, this is, of course, it's a speculation, it's a theory. I have a theory, and I don't know if it is a deliberate strategy from the side of prosecutors. And I talked to Nancy about this too. The thing is, over 15 journalists, I think this is an important figure, over 15 journalists have been wiretapped by prosecutors in the same period. From 2017 to 2018, over 15 journalists were wiretapped in Italy by different prosecutors' offices. Now, those journalists were all covering the migration crisis. And the prosecutors who secretly recorded their conversation with their sources, they were all working on cases of people smuggling and migrants. And this is far from being a coincidence to me. Let's focus for 1 minute on Nancy's case, which is the most serious one. Nancy is an expert on Libya. She has incredible contacts there, a clear understanding of the situation. Nancy knows what is going in Libya, and she knows more than the prosecutors. And you see, prosecutors, European prosecutors in general, they cannot count on police forces in Libya. Countries can barely count on a diplomatic presence in Libya. And without credible intelligence on smugglers, the prosecutors' investigation on human trafficking, migrants or NGOs became basically a hunt from a distance, a chase against windmills. You see, prosecutors, not only were they unfamiliar with the languages of the people who were recorded, but as they often admitted, they didn't even know that these languages existed, like Tigrinya, the language spoken in much of Eritrea. The results were catastrophic. Many Eritreans implicated themselves simply by mentioning common surnames while speaking on the phone. The investigators, they heard what they thought were the names of notorious smugglers, when Eritreans were simply talking about friends or relatives or local greengrocer. Now, prosecutors responsible for the rest of the Eritrean men prosecutors in Palermo, suspected, of the regime men suspected of being one of the world's most wanted people smugglers, even confuse the word for when in the Tigrinya language with the name of a man they thought was a powerful smuggler. They placed under investigation an adverb. Not only they mistook a refugee with a smuggler, but they also mistook a smuggler with an adverb. They used Facebook to investigate the smugglers' network. European authorities have also used selfies and other information from people's social media feeds as if they were IDs. Countless people, ended up under investigation for having friended a suspected smuggler on Facebook. Greece and Italy have arrested thousands of migrants for piloting smuggling boats, even though they were forced to do it at gunpoint. And this is not only about Italy. Greece did the same. Germany, France, Denmark, Sweden, even the British NCA, they all contributed to these arrests. They have arrested thousands of boat drivers, but the real smugglers are still at large. To date, all the investigation into the big human traffickers have been a complete failure. And the same goes for the inquiries into the legal relationship between the NGO and the smugglers. They are hunting from remote. They know nothing of what is going on in North Africa. But they know that journalists have more contacts than them in these places. They knew that Nancy had more contacts than them in Libya. They wanted to know, with whom she was talking. By wiretapping Nancy, by wiretapping journalists, they wanted to know more about Libya and about smugglers. Nancy, as she said, she was called by the authorities in Rome to talk about Libya, but still, they wanted to know if she was saying everything.
And not just by reading the articles.
Yeah,
they want to actually dig into what the person actually is pulling out.
Exactly. They place her phone number under surveillance. And there are several reasons for why authorities are wiretapping journalists. It could be intimidation, it could be to discredit their work. But to me, wiretapping journalists is also a way for prosecutors to know more, about what's going on in the Central Mediterranean or in other specific area of the planet. Wiretapping journalists has revealed to me how prosecutors, authorities in general, have grasped nothing of what really is at stake in dealing with migration.
So what I'm hearing you say is that in a lot of cases, and this is universal, I think, for law enforcement, is that they're taking what they think is the easy route and getting information that it would be far too complicated to get. And I think that this is a good segue where we can introduce our third panelist, Ilaria, who is not a journalist, but a lawyer who works on these media defense issues. And in fact, you have a relationship to both Lorenzo and Nancy through your firm in this case, right? It would be helpful for us if you certainly introduce yourself and your work, but help sketch out a little bit of the facts here about we started by calling it illegal wiretapping, but there's also legal wiretapping, right? And help us. I'm not very familiar with Italian law and what the parameters of this are, and how are these cases within it, and how are these cases outside of it?
So thank you. My name is Ilaria Acquironi. I'm a lawyer in the Verona bar, and I'm also a research fellow at the University of Ferrara and International Law. The law firm I work for has had the honor to deal with Nancy Porsia's case, with her case, lodging an application before the European Court of Human Rights on her behalf. You were asking me something concerning the Italian legal framework concerning wiretapping. Of course, there are illegal wiretapping and legal wiretapping, you're right. I will not delve too much into details, but basically wiretapping is admitted by some articles of the Italian Criminal Procedure Code, especially as regards crimes punished with long life imprisonment or detention superior to, in the maximum, over 5 years. There's a normal procedure according to which the public prosecutor asks for an authorization to the investigating judge, to the giudice delle indagini preliminari, asked for an authorization where there are grave, serious indications of an offense, and in case it is absolutely necessary to proceed with wiretapping. There's also an urgency procedure that is the one that has been used in Nancy Porsia's case. So in case the delay that might arise due to this need of authorization process may prejudice, may jeopardize the investigations, well, the public prosecutors may order directly wiretapping, may issue, therefore, a decree authorizing wiretapping. This decree then needs to be communicated to the investigation judge, and the investigation judge has 48 hours to validate this decree. In any case, this wiretapping cannot last more than 15 days. And the renewal, well, these 15 days can be renewed, but the renewal needs to be grounded, needs to be motivated, and those motivations, those foundations that have allowed wiretapping need to be always there.
So just to asking for my own clarity as well, what you're saying is that there's a normal procedure, and the normal procedure is time-consuming, and it goes through a lot of review, but
the urgent
there's a way to create urgency that I imagine is based on an argument that if we don't act now, the perpetrator is going to escape, or someone's going to go away.
The risk of passing of time, basically.
Of course, in the case that we're talking about here, we know that this individual is sitting right where they are, and they're not going anywhere. And then, of course, you said that the wiretapping was 6 months or
6
4 months?
months.
6 months.
No break.
So multiple...
15 days, 15 days,
So you're going in front of this judge, so they had to argue, fascinating. So they were essentially saying that this is of such high priority that we need to constantly be on her phone.
And basically she was wiretapped, may I say so, even if when she was on holiday, basically, I guess. So she was wiretapped during such a long period that really the grounding for wiretapping were lacking. They were trying to either basically create some new reasons for wiretapping her, or repeating like stereotypized.
So can I ask another question about, I'm going to put myself in their shoes for a second and think through. I'm an investigator, and as Lorenzo says, I'm maybe a little lazy, and I want to get a lot of information, but I don't want to try very hard. In the way that you've described Nancy as sort of a nexus or a hub of information, but I'm interested in these other people. And so as I understand the way wiretapping would work is that I want to stay, Nancy's not my target, so I'm just going to wiretap Nancy until I find the number of this other person, and then they become my new target. And then Nancy, how do you justify holding on to the wiretap of Nancy for this entire period when she's not actually the target of the investigation?
There's no justification, basically, to trust our client, and we need to be safe. We need to feel safe.
Completely.
So basically violated completely.
Well, so my lawyer is also assisted by their law firm.
So I guess what I'm asking is, right, in the United States, we call that a privilege, it's a privileged conversation, and there's no, as I understand, there's almost no way legally, in America at least, to get to that information. In Italy, it's the same way?
It's the same, but they did it. They
did it
they breached the law, as simple as that, because Alessandra Ballerini, that is my lawyer, was my lawyer back then in the sense of the situation I was in, and she was assisting me. In fact, I asked Alessandra Ballerini also to take me to Libya. When Abdul Rahman al-Milad proposed me to meet in Tripoli in this spot, a very weird spot, I called Alessandra, that is my lawyer, and I asked her, would you take me to Libya? Would you come to Libya with me? And Alessandra was very straight. She told me, listen, Nancy, if I come with you, they would put us both in prison. The only way not to be arrested on our arrival is, if they want to arrest you, is to show up with diplomatic personnel, and there was no option for that. So we were talking about my situation, and they wiretapped all our conversations, plus about other details of other cases. So Alessandra Ballerini is assisted with me from their firm.
Got it. And so that's completely in violation of,
Yeah.
and yet they put that in the dossier that they released?
Pardon?
They admitted it?
Yeah, well, they were. There's a mechanism that allows for the erase somehow of these wiretappings, but that has not worked in their case. So in between the public prosecutor phase and the preliminary judges phase, there's a way to destroy somehow. But I mean, you cannot wiretap and then destroy the proofs. Basically, the violation is still there. You should not wiretap journalists, wiretap lawyers, human rights defenders. Basically, that's their goal. And she was used because of her, basically, because of the information she possesses. And indeed, well, so there's no way out within the Italian legal system to raise such an issue. So wiretapping, transcripting the wiretap, her conversations, monitoring her throughout her movements, basically do constitute violation of her fundamental human rights, her freedom of expression, her right to private and professional life, as well as the right to respect of her correspondence, rights that find a protection at the international level, indeed. So there are instruments, international convention, and the most famous one, basically the most useful tool we have in our hands, is the European Convention on Human Rights, whose monitoring body, that is the European Court of Human Rights, allows a mechanism to assess compliance of the respect of human rights. So that's the reason why we choose directly to lodge an application before the European Court of Human Rights on her behalf, lamenting violation of Article 8, so a right to private and professional life, and the right to respect of her correspondence, as well as of Article 10 that grants freedom of expression. Well, normally the resort to international adjudication mechanism is available only insofar as all the national remedies have been exhausted, have been already gone through, basically. But in this case, as I said before, no remedies was there. So we also contested the absence of a remedy within the Italian legal system of allowing her right to private and personal life and to her freedom of expression to be protected. So that's our main point.
They completely, you felt like you had no other method to do this. I think what I want to,
sorry, Jason, for interrupting. I want to just to specify that after the case got public, the Italian Ministry of Justice decided to open an investigation within the process of an internal investigation at the public office, prosecutor office in Trapani. And after a few months, they come up with the report, with the response that there was no breach of law.
Right.
So this was the
Impunity.
Italian, this was the Italian
I want to,
authority.
so we've spent a fair amount of time talking about what happened and well, we talked about the facts of what happened. I'd like to talk a little bit, and Lorenzo spoke to a little bit to the what it means or some of the motivations. Because I'm a security professional, and because this portion of the talk is run by a security organization, by ACOS, the ACOS Alliance, I want to talk about what does this actually mean operationally? What is the danger that we're talking about here by wiretapping journalists who are doing the work? And so Lorenzo and Nancy, talk to me a little bit about, it's now public, here you are, you're speaking publicly saying, if you talk to me, there's a good chance that there's a police officer, maybe there's a police, should we all say hi to the police officers that are on your phone right now? So how has that impacted, so I'll start with you, Lorenzo, how has that impacted your work? I mean, you're going to Eritrea, and then you find out, and then this finds out, now it's public. Do you still go to Eritrea? Do you feel safe working in these areas?
Yeah, I mean, and actually there is a funny joke every time I talk to the lawyer who was defending the man mistaken for a smuggler. I always told him, "Hi, Michele." His name was Michele. Let's say hi to the police officer who's listening to our conversation. No, I think okay. First of all, which I think it's important. I think we should. I want to talk about just briefly the psychological impact of this. I mean, I felt helpless. I was lucky because I could count on the incredible support by the Guardian team, both legal and editorial team. But still, I started being a bit paranoid, suffered from panic attacks, had trouble to sleep at night, lost all my contacts and sources among the authorities. Definitely lost my Eritrean source. I mean, who wants to talk to a journalist who has been wiretapped by prosecutors? I mean, it was hard. And again, I was lucky because I could count on the Guardian. But please try to imagine when this happens to independent journalists, freelancers, Italian freelancers who are often underpaid, and they cannot count on the support of a legal team or newspaper. But I realized that I had to do something if I wanted to continue working. So first, what I did was I moved all my conversation, my confidential conversation and interviews on Signal. I kept, and I'm trying to keep, updated software on my iPhone to the latest version. And so I did with my browsers, Google Chrome and Firefox. I also set up two-step authentication on my accounts on Twitter, Facebook, and Gmail. And I always try to interview people in person rather than talking to them over the phone, even when this means working under these circumstances.
And it is difficult. And the list of steps that you're taking, I can confirm and back up that those are wise moves. And Nancy, you are a freelancer. And I was going to ask you, and then I'm going to briefly talk about actually some of the security and maybe give some bad news to the group as well. But where did you find support when this was happening?
Let's say that when I was informed that I was wiretapped, it was a very breaking point. The first reaction was anger, because my private life was at the disposal of thousands of people. In terms of work as a journalist, I know that might sound weird, but I was relieved. I felt relieved because finally it was proved that I was not a schizophrenic. Because for a couple of years, I had to bear all the consequences of my investigations, and as you said, I'm a freelancer, so I lost my bread. I lost a lot of things. I had to reinvent my work, and let's say that the worst was the isolation that I suffered from the journalistic community. This is a fact.
How so?
Yes, nobody has actually supported my work. you know, people that were, meaning people that were actually working on Libya instead of losing their access, because let's
Right.
be honest, before I published my investigation, I knew that I could lose the access. I was not naive. I did it. It was a very clear stand, you know. I didn't want to indulge those mafia people. I did it at my expenses. And I always say that I was ready to take all the consequences of my choice because I knew that I was going to get enemies. What I was not ready for was the indifference or probably the isolation from the community. I'm talking about, again, colleagues that were covering Libya and they didn't mention anything because they wanted to keep covering the country.
Because they viewed you as toxic?
Yeah, like, okay,
if
Nancy,
someone
you've
knows-
already
yeah.
talked about this issue, just forget about it. Nonetheless, when this issue became breaking news, everybody was covering this news, you know. It's just like a fast food of the information. And as freelancer, it was, for me, it was a breaking down moment. But I've never regret, anyhow. And yeah, well, so on the private level, I felt very angry. On the professional level, I felt relieved because finally it was proved that I was not inventing the sensitiveness of my work in Libya, but the sensitiveness of the political sensitiveness of my work in Libya was real, was concrete. And so then, of course, it was, I mean, the first reaction was probably was from my partner, that is a Libyan political activist. He got shocked because I knew that I could be wiretapped. But for my partner, that is a Libyan political analyst, I remember in those days, he just told me, okay, Nancy, I don't feel safe in Italy anymore. Let's move. Because he works also with sensitive topics, of course. And for him, it was, if I cannot trust the Italian law, what am I doing here?
So how did you find Ilaria's, how did that relationship get established?
Well, I waited for the response from the Italian justice minister first. When I heard that for them there was no violation of the law, of the legal procedures, I decided to go forward with the international court, with the European Court of Human Rights. And it happened that my lawyer about the Libyan affairs told me, listen, Nancy, why don't you join me with my lawyer? Because I asked Antonella Mascia, the director of the law firm, to defend me. Do you want to join me? So we had a call, and Antonella Mascia told me, Nancy, I would be very happy to take your case, because for me it's a kind of sui generis, you know, it's
Right,
a
of
unique
course.
case, so it's a challenge for me. And then we've got the good news that the case was not rejected from the European Court, and he could be rejected because actually we skipped the national level. But the European Court took it, so now we are
And so,
in the process.
And so, Ilaria, is that a normal process for a journalist who's been wronged? What's the process to reach out to seek justice? Is there some sort of, who pays for it?
Who pays for it? What is the normal process? The normal process is going international. So basically resorting to the European Court of Human Rights, resorting to an international organization that is the Council of Europe, within the framework of which the European Convention of Human Rights has been adopted and the European Court of Human Rights work. That is an international organization that is sensitive to the instances of journalists, of lawyers, and an international organization and a court that considers freedom of expression as representing one of the essential foundations of a democratic society. So on the one hand, you have the national jurisdiction that somehow leave you helpless, basically. I took down a couple of words from your speeches. So you feel helpless because you don't feel protected by the national jurisdiction. So the only way is going international. And
that's what your firm specializes in.
Yes,
right.
That is. And the going international also can also be a way of addressing a systemic problem. Right. It is not the case, Nancy Porsia's case, Lorenzo Tondo's case. It is a systemic problem we have in Italy, but also in other jurisdictions. So, for example, Lorenzo was saying that more than 15 journalists were wiretapped. According to the data I have, there were 33 journalists wiretapped, and all working in the area, in the sensitive area of migration. So the way of addressing such systemic issues is going international. The application, Nancy's application has overcome the first step, that is the admissibility phase. So it has been declared admissible. There might have been problems because of the lack of internal remedies, but we've overcome the issue of admissibility. You should consider that, for example, one case up to 10 passes this initial
So it's
stage.
not very common to make your...
Not very common, but I mean, it means that there's somehow some sort of prognosis that it will be successful. And then there might be a declaration of a violation. So the case for the moment has passed the phase of admissibility. It has not been communicated to the government yet. Once it has been communicated to the government, there might be an adversarial phase, according to which the government, during which the government is called to explain the reasons why the public prosecutors decided wiretapping her. And then the ultimate result might be the assessment, the ascertainment by the European Court of Human Rights of a violation of Article 8, right to protection of private life, and of the freedom of expression, protected under Article 10 of the Convention, and hopefully an ascertainment of so the state might be considered, will be hopefully considered responsible for this violation, and the state will be asked to provide some sort of compensation, that is, some sort of
a remedy
to this issue. But again, going international, I think that is the only way through.
So, and it's very helpful, and we're wrapping up with our time, but I want to, I want to put a security lens on this as well, because while it's, and I wish you the best of success in this case, and I hope that you're able to get this, but unfortunately, oftentimes, right, governments, even if they lose, and even if they have to pay, we hope that it helps, it encourages them to change their behavior, but sometimes they won't, or other governments won't. And what can we do to help mitigate or prevent some of these issues? And Lorenzo, something that you had mentioned that I want to just touch on with my experience in security and my experience in working with many journalists who have been surveilled and wiretapped, and it's a maxim that's important for everyone to know who does this kind of work, is that every spy has a boss, okay? And they have to justify, even if they're using illegal means or whatever, they still have to justify the tools that they're going to use, the methods that they're going to use, and the resources that they're going to use. And so somebody had asked me earlier about Pegasus. If you haven't heard, it's this very sophisticated piece of malware that you can use. It may have been used here, it may have not. Our goal, or my goal in security, what I always try to tell my journalists is I say, make them spend as much money as possible on this wiretap. Like, make it the world's most complicated wiretap you can possibly do, because the hope is that that's another form of deterrent, right? If it's easy, you know, and if you're using an easy-to-access phone, so if you're using like a non-patched old Android phone that isn't very sophisticated, the exploits for those can be purchased for $5,000, $10,000. Pegasus is millions of dollars. If you have a brand new iPhone that's updated to the latest version, or an Android that's updated to the very latest version, the cost to put what's called a remote control exploit, a zero day on those devices, is hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the question is the prosecutor willing to spend that money? Maybe they are, but let's make them spend the money. Don't make it easy for them. And the same thing goes for surveillance, and the same thing goes for all of these things. So Lorenzo has it exactly right. You know, update your devices, keep two-factor authentication on everything that you do, because it's actually going to, it's just gonna make them think twice before they do it. And then the last piece of bad news that I have to say, unfortunately, is that nowadays the technology for this wiretapping is very sophisticated, and some people have always said, well, you know, you said, I think I was wiretapped because something was weird with my phone, or nowadays, if your phone has been successfully breached or tapped, most of these exploits, you'll never know. You could take it to specialists, and there's something called the Citizen Lab in Toronto, and they'll work with journalists and human rights defenders if they've got Pegasus or something like Pegasus. But in most cases, if you've got an advanced exploit, it's very hard to tell, and it's not going to be, and you know, there's all these like sort of ideas that, oh, if you hold your phone this way and shake it, then you can like hear the bug inside. Like, it's not the truth. And so this is both supposed to calm you, but also perhaps put some urgency, which is to say, don't worry about hearing weird things on your phone or something like that, like, oh, what does it mean? It's probably nothing, but if it's there, that's not how you're going to find it, and you'll have to, you know, try the legal method, or you'll have to try the other method. So I know that we're just out of time, and I think that this was really a fascinating case, and I hope that you get the accountability for the case that you're working on, certainly for Nancy and Lorenzo, likewise for you, and of course it's clear that we're also hoping that your story actually results. Maybe this actually happened. Was the person released, or is he still in jail?
It was released. It was released in 2021.
Oh, that's great.
For actually for mistaken identity.
So that's the impact journalism, I guess, that counts. So I'd like to give a round of applause to our great panelists here. They're wonderful. And it's a lot of courage. It's a lot of courage to do this kind of work, and obviously to work under the stress of knowing that an entire government and their resources is arrayed against you. So so thank you, because you know it's really inspiring to see that kind of work. And thank everyone for coming.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Do you have other panels?
Yeah, tomorrow I get to talk about online.